They never took his photo. That's the first thing that unsettles you when you research the Yamhill files. No photograph, no official portrait, nothing that proves Dr. Wilhelm Ludwig ever existed beyond his crooked signature in 3 medical ledgers and an unexplained death toll that nearly tripled the county average between 1878 and 1882. He's there in whispers, in half sentences scratched into brittle documents. A doctor whose clinic was never inspected, whose patients were rarely seen again, whose final experiment left behind something some no one in Oregon has ever managed to explain. Not to this day. It wasn't that he killed them. Or not just that. There are worse things than dying in the frontier west, and everyone in Yamhill knew it. Bodies decayed, bones were buried under rocks, cabins caught fire with people still inside. Death was part of the soil out there, but Ludwig, he tried to stop it, tried to pin it down, cage it, bleed it from the flesh like poison. And what? Came out the thing that walked out of his shack that last October morning wasn't death, wasn't life either, was something in between. A placeholder, a stitched-together waiting room for something that hadn't yet finished arriving. The first patients were accidental. Migrant workers, railroad hands, drunks with burst limbs and infected teeth. Ludwig didn't charge them. That was part of his legend. He'd treat you for free if you could walk to his cabin alone. Of course, most didn't walk back. The ones who did, if you can even call it walking, were never quite right. Neighbors said they moved like their bones didn't. Remember where to bend. Some wandered straight back into the woods barefoot in snow. Others sat in the middle of town square and cried without sound for hours before being hauled off by their families. The county never arrested him. There were no laws yet, not really. The sheriff's office was a single man named Harland Wicks. And Wicks had a brother who'd survived a ruptured gut thanks to Ludwig's needlework. Wicks let him be, so did everyone else, until fall of 1881, when Ludwig found someone he didn't want to fix. He wanted to change him. The boy had no name, or rather he refused to give one, found curled in a roadside ditch west of Meckmanville. Naked, shaking, and repeating 3 syllables over and over in what no one could place. Not German, not Latin, not even native, just sound. Rhythmic and dry like sand caught in a throat. Ludwig was called by one of the local farmers to assess him, and from the moment the boy met his eyes, he stopped muttering, stood up, walked to. Ludwig like a stray dog sensing a new master. Witnesses said the doctor didn't speak, just opened the back of his cart and let the boy climb in. He was about 15, thin, pale in a way that didn't match the sun-baked land. Hair like flax, no scars. No bruises. It's not a single sign of trauma, but his teeth. That was what the preacher's wife remembered most. Small, even. Except for one the left incisor, which had not come in human. It was sharp, shaped like something. From a fox or weasel, she swore it. He stayed in the shack for 3 nights. There were no screams, no light. Just strange mechanical noises. One local trapper claimed he heard water running over and over, like something being drowned and revived in cycles. On the 4th day, the door opened and the boy came out. He had no eyebrows, no hair anywhere, no clothes either, just a long sheet draped over him like a baptism robe. Skin was unmarked except for the black thread crossing his mouth, stitched shut in 5 uneven pulls. His eyes were wrong too, still blue, but clouded slightly, like they were filled with milk. Didn't speak. He didn't run or hide. He walked into town, sat outside the dry goods store, didn't move until sundown. Then he stood, turned east, and began walking down the road toward the river. Someone followed him. An older man who lived near the wharf, curious more than anything. He said the boy reached the bridge, stopped, and looked up at the sky as though listening to something no one else could hear. Then, without bending his knees, he sat in the middle of the bridge and stared straight ahead into nothing for almost 12 hours. The next morning, Dr. Ludwig was gone. Shack had been cleaned. No blood, no tools, not even a note. Just a single book on the tabla, black-bound copy of the new medical lexicon, missing over half its pages. Some were burned, some sliced with surgical precision, some soaked in what appeared to be animal fat. The only remaining legible page was one detailing a procedure for radical nerve ablation used in Civil War cases of uncontrollable phantom limb syndrome. The boy, the stitched-mouthed figure, disappeared too. But he didn't stay gone. Every decade since, someone in Oregon has claimed to see him. Always in rural towns. Always silent. Never aged. He appears near old hospitals, burned cabins, abandoned surgery centers. He doesn't speak, doesn't blink. Just waits, stares, then leaves. Sometimes animals die after his visit. Sometimes children get fevers that don't break. One family claimed they saw him standing in their barn for 5 straight nights, and on the 6th, the patriarch dropped dead of what the coroner called acute emotional failure, a made-up term. Nothing to put on paper. Dr. Ludwig's license was never found because it never existed. His real name likely wasn't Ludwig. German records from the 1870s show 3 men with that surname involved in something called Project Schattenzong, Shadow Tongue Project Han, experimental clinic, dedicated to treating speech-bound mental disorders through spiritual filtration. All 3 men vanished after their facility burned down in 1876. One was listed as Dr. W. Ludwig. The last known sighting of the boy, or whatever he is now, was just outside Salem in 1991. He appeared behind a shuttered tuberculosis ward. 2 teenagers filming a music video caught him standing in the window of the 3rd floor. His stitched mouth still intact, eyes still milky. He didn't move. But when they played the video back at home, they discovered something even stranger. In the audio beneath the static, beneath the wind, you could hear a voice, not speaking, singing the same 3 syllables, looped over and over. No one has ever translated them, and no one's gone back to that building since. They never found his photograph. In an age when even horse thieves and fever doctors had portrait sepia prints with crooked spines and cloudy eyes, Dr. Wilhelm Ludwig left behind not a single image, just a few names scribbled in long faded ledgers, just initials beside dying men's last temperatures. Just stories. And if you ask the oldest families in Yamhill County, stories are sometimes more dangerous than evidence. His clinic, if you could even call it, that wasn't listed on any map. It stood on a slope just north of the abandoned Ash Grove Mill, 3 miles into a patch of red pine that locals avoided even in daylight. The path to his door wound through brush so tight it carved patterns into your coat sleeves, if not your skin. By the time a man reached Ludwig's threshold, he was already marked, scarred, initiated. They say Ludwig kept his tools in whiskey crates, used needles, and stitched with horsehair. But they also say he cured things no other man would. Touch, gangrenous limbs, fevered infants. Women bled near to death in childbirth. He asked for no money. No thanks. Only silence. And for a time the community gave him that silence. Because he lived in a place no one wanted to look. Because he worked at night. Because his patients didn't talk afterward. Those who survived his care always seemed quieter than before, as if some voice had been taken not from the throat but the soul, and if they died, they were buried without questions. But then came the boy. Everything began to unravel. He wasn't born there. That much they all agreed on. Some said he was French-Canadian, others that he was native-born but raised by missionaries. The truth, as with most things tied to Ludwig, is harder to untangle. The first time anyone saw the boy, he was standing alone on the banks of the Yamhill River, barefoot in the cold October mud, staring at a dead cow. Not crying, not afraid, just watching it, as if he knew how it died, as if he'd been waiting for it. A farmhand named Abel Chance found him, wrapped him in a feed sack, and took him to the town deacon. But the deacon wouldn't keep him, said. The boy looked straight through him, and when asked his name, the boy made a sound, a low, repeating syllable no one could place. Not a word. Not even speech. Just resonance. They sent for Ludwig. He arrived at dusk in his usual Wayno lantern. No horse, walking alone with a black satchel under one arm. He looked the boy in the face, then turned and walked away without a word. The boy followed. That was the last anyone saw of them for 3 nights. On the morning of the 4th day, smoke rose from the chimney behind the Ash Grove Mill. It was black smoke, oily thick, a residue that clung to leaves for days, made birds steer wide in the sky. Sheriff's deputy was sent up the slope by order of the county magistrate, not out of suspicion, but protocol. What he found at the cabin was enough to send him stumbling back down the path. With his mouth sealed shut for the rest of his life, he never filed a report, not formally, but in a saloon 2 decades later. With a pistol half-cocked in his lap, the same man would murmur into a bottle that it wasn't the boy's eyes that bothered me. It was the doctor's. They were grateful. The townspeople said the boy had changed. The child who couldn't speak now sat on Ludwig's porch at night, murmuring constant low-pitched syllables, not Wordstone's notes. The pattern was unsettling in its calmness like prayer, but slower. It's more intentional. He no longer blinked when spoken to, no longer slept, or if he did, it was sitting upright in a wooden chair outside the shack. Watching the trees, Ludwig refused new patients after that. He turned away women in labor, refused to treat a logger with a bone-deep axe wound. Even when threatened with prosecution, he didn't respond. Only left a crude sign nailed to the tree. Beside the path, entry purification in progress. It was the first time he'd ever used the word we. Whispers began. Of chanting in the woods at night. Of light spell flickering blue from the windows. Of bones found nailed to trees in geometric patterns. A deputy found one of the doctor's old patients stumbling down the trail, barefoot and bloodied, her ears packed with wax and cloth, screaming that the boy wasn't inside anymore. When they tried to ask what she meant, she clawed out her own eyes with a spoon. That was the last time anyone tried to climb the hill by daylight. By December of 1881, the town council issued a warrant for Ludwig's arrest officially for negligence, unofficially for disturbing the dead. A doctor's apprentice claimed to have seen the man at night, dragging something behind his cabin, wrapped in blood-stained linen. The boy, if it was still a boy, is always close behind, reciting that same unholy hum. The posse that went up never came back. 6 men, all armed. 2 of them veterans of the Indian Wars, and not a single one returned. 3 weeks later, a young girl found one of their rifles sticking out of a tree, not leaning against it, embedded in it, fused with the bark as if it had grown there. None of the men's bodies were ever found. By the end of winter, families began to abandon their homes near Ashgrove. Livestock turned up eviscerated. Babies wouldn't stop crying. Dogs barked at corners of the room where no one stood. Even priests grew reluctant to give blessings in that direction. The land itself was being evacuated. The doctor still hadn't been seen, except by the river. 1. Night in January, a fisherman returned home pale and shivering, unable to speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he said he'd seen the boy, standing ankle-deep in the shallows, shirtless, staring at the water like it was a mirror and then walking into it, disappearing without a splash. When asked how he knew it was the boy, he didn't blink because I could hear it. Hear. What? He looked up. That humming. It's still in my ears. By early spring, the Ashgrove region was no longer part of Oregon in any meaningful sense. The roads leading into it were overgrown in weeks. Railmen refused to lay tracks near the valley, citing derailments, horse panic, and a whistling wind that made their teeth ache. There were sightings brief, scattered, half-believed, of a man and a boy walking the edge of the pines. Not exactly together, but near each other, the boy always in front. The doctor some 10 paces behind, both silent, both moving in perfect rhythm, as if answering some inner clock no one else could hear. It said a group of timber scouts entered the old Ashgrove clearing one foggy afternoon in April. There were 3 of them, all hired out of Portland to assess new logging routes. What they found wasn't a mill. They found a hole. It had never been there before. No markings, no fence. Just a sunken impression in the earth, too smooth to be natural. Nearly 30 feet wide, ringed with small white stones. Depression, dark, circular, bottomless. The scouts didn't stay. They left their equipment behind. One was found days later walking barefoot along the train tracks into Salem, babbling about bone, wind, and breath that had no lungs. The other 2 were never found at all, not even names on a census. After that, Ludwig's name, meanwhile, returned briefly in a letter addressed to the State Sanatorium in Astoria. It's postmarked but unsigned. It read, "Cognition remains. But the intervals between coherence are widening. The boy cannot be sustained in a single body. Has begun speaking in dialects I did not teach, languages I have never heard. We are beyond tissue, beyond nerve. I fear it has memories that are not its own." The letter was dismissed as a hoax, but one detail gave an archivist pause. The envelope contained a smudged ink, drawing crudely sketched but chilling in its precision. It showed a child's face, eyes closed. But around its head were hundreds of concentric circles, like a halo, each one etched with glyphs, some that resembled Greek, others older. Some symbols didn't match any known language at the bottom. In faint pencil, "He hears what you dream when you're unborn." That summer, the dreams began to spread. 2 children first, then women, eventually to men. Dreams of standing in endless pine groves under a sickly red sky, of being unable to move, of hearing a voice, not from outside but from behind the eyes. A slow murmur, not hostile, not kind, just constant. A recitation. Memory played on repeat, and always the same words in waking. "I saw the boy. He's inside the trees now." Farmers raised their own homes. Some set fire to entire barns. Before disappearing into the woods, one preacher slit his wrists and wrote the word repeating across his church floor in blood. Even the rationale grew paranoid. Wives left husbands. Sons turned on fathers. No one could say what was happening. Only that it was centered on Ashgrove, and still no body was ever found. Not of Ludwig. Not of the boy. Not even bones. Just a perimeter of fear that seemed to breathe and expand, like lungs exhaling madness.
There are no surviving photographs of the Ashgrove property after 1881, but in 1946, a geologist conducting a mineral survey in that part of Oregon found something that never made it into his report. Tucked inside a rusted metal box buried near the site of the old mill was a series of notes, zinc-faded, paper mold, streaked, but legible. They were written in a tight, deficient German script and signed only with the initial L. They were not medical notes, they were records of time in ways the body was never meant to hold. The early pages were simple enough temperature logs, dosages, sleep duration. But by page 11, the notes shifted into observation not of physiology, but of consciousness. The boy referred to only as subject was not described as healing or declining. Instead, he was drifting, not dying, not improving. Sliding. Ludwig wrote, "When the heartbeat ceases, the self begins to retreat, not up, not down, but sideways. There is a threshold at the moment of cellular cessation, a window, narrow, yes, but not impassable." The implication was staggering. He wasn't trying to save the boy, he was trying to follow him. Local legends, fragmented through oral retellings, speak of the Ashgrove reversal, a point sometime in late August when the trees no longer leaned away from the old clearing but, toward it, animals stopped fleeing and began gathering. Deer, crows, even wolves all, seen circling the site for days at a time, heads tilted, unmoving, as if listening. As if remembering. The children in nearby towns were struck by seizures, dozens in a single week, but not of the violent, thrashing kind. These were silent seizures, blank stares, hours without blinking. Some children were reported to speak in unrecognizable phrases during these trances. One mother claimed her 7-year-old, previously mute, sat up at midnight and spoke in German, not modern German, Middle-High German. The phrase, later translated by a scholar, meant, "You brought back the wrong one." The shift became irreversible when people began seeing their dead. Not ghosts, not spirits. Their dead. A woman in the Dalles swore she saw her stillborn daughter walking down the hill behind her home, barefoot, silent. A mill worker in Salem claimed his brother killed in the war appeared at his bed and whispered something unintelligible, but with his voice. These weren't hallucinations. Each sighting was followed by the same symptom, the dream of the pine trees, the red sky, the voice inside the eyes. But here's what the doctors couldn't explain. Each dream began before the sightings, as if the memory arrived ahead of the event, as if something had learned to broadcast across time. Note in Ludwig's journal simply read, "Consciousness does not require flesh. The body is only the receiver." and I have tuned the boy to a wider channel. Whatever he did, whether surgery, chemical, or psychic, he had widened the aperture. The boy's body became a kind of resonant chamber, not for music, but for memory, not just his own, but others. Ones without origin, without birth. People who dreamt of the boy didn't forget him, ever. Even 60 years later, patients at mental institutions in Oregon mumbled the same tune he once hummed. Identical intervals, identical pitch. None of them ever met. The humming was never recorded. But survivors, what few remain, said that it wasn't a melody. It was a map, a kind of cognitive lattice. If you listened long enough, it stopped being a sound and started becoming an idea. And then it started to replace your own dot. In the winter of 1950, a linguist named Orla Mayhew was brought in from Chicago to investigate a rash of mirrored speech disorders in 3 Oregon towns. Children between the ages of 6 and 12 had begun speaking fluently in what they called their night voice. They used it only in sleep or just after waking. The language was unknown rhythmic, with long strings of consonants and glottal sounds. No clear roots in Latin, Germanic, or indigenous tongues. But it wasn't the language that disturbed Mayhew. It was the syntax. Each child structured their sentences, not around time, but around return. There was no past or future, only recurrence. I come again. I've been again. I become again. They didn't dream of events. They dreamed of positions, of places in the forest, of standing where the blood breathes backward, and always, always, the same name when pressed, Ludwig. 2 months into her fieldwork, Mayhew found herself in Ashgrove, or what was left of it. The valley had long since been abandoned. No postal address, no structures, just a soft depression in the earth, almost like a thumbprint pressed into a map of moss, a surveyor's tool left nearby abandoned. Decades ago, he guessed it a consistent hum beneath the soil, sub-bodable, measured in frequencies usually detected in electrical equipment, not land. She described the experience in a letter to her sister. I stood in the middle of the clearing, and I could hear my father's voice. He's been dead for years, but I heard him say my name like he used to when I was 5. The tone, the weight, everything. But he never said it out loud like that in my memory. It was like I remembered something that had never happened to me. She left the valley the next morning. That letter was her last dot. Her body was never found, but her notes remained. And in the margins, scrawled in pencil, she had written, "I think this is what the boy became. Not a ghost, not a soul, a magnet, pulling pieces of the dead into the present, not to haunt us, but to replace us." If you listen closely, you'll notice the stories around Ludwig stopped not because they were forgotten, but because they started repeating the same figures, the same sightings, the same dreams, decades apart, states apart, cultures apart, but the same words, the same boy, the same boy, the same hum, and the same question. What did Ludwig pull back through the child's brain? No one can answer, but there's a you trace the dates, the voices, the frequencies. You'll find a map, and at the center, still standing, still listening, still alive in some way. That has nothing to do with flesh or time. The patient who never died,